You can't see me right now, obviously, but I am shaking my head and laughing at myself in that way that you can't quite believe what's happened, but also you totally can believe it. Because a couple of months ago, when I sat down with Dave Conrey, after connecting online and noticing some similar sentiments around the realities of trying to be self-employed artists, in other words, yes, you do have to promote yourself. We both agree. Sorry. And while the crux of this conversation still holds true, the reason I'm laughing at myself is because Dave and I originally connected thanks to the very early days of a new social media platform called Threads, the Twitter, now called X, whatever it is, competitor app that Instagram came out with earlier this year. Now, before your heart rate starts increasing because you're feeling like you have to join yet another app, take a deep breath. It's not what I'm suggesting. Frankly, I hardly ever log on there anymore, which shouldn't really come as a surprise. It just so happens that the algorithm robots showed me some of Dave's own posts in the early days of tinkering around and seeing what was happening, and we connected. However, the reason I'm laughing now is because this episode is airing right as yet another app has come onto the market and struck a chord, particularly with artists. I don't know if it's called Kara or Kara. I have no idea. But the way in which I saw so many artist friends jumping over there to Kara or Kara, whatever we want to call it, thanking the internet robot gods that there was finally a way for them to shove it to Instagram, well, it's been disheartening to see. Not because I think Instagram is perfect, by no means. Let's be honest, it's just another massive corporation at this point who are always going to continue to make the decisions that most benefit their bottom line. I have no romantic notions of Instagram or any other third-party app ever being, or frankly ever having been, an altruistic platform for us to spread the word about our work in whatever way we want, easy peasy, no problem. Yeah, sorry. Frankly, I have a lot more thoughts on the subject, clearly, so I'm working on writing up a quick little solo episode coming up next week on more of all of that. I'm gonna stop my rambling now and get into the original conversation I had with Dave, a rare non-potter here on the podcast. In this episode, we talk about the realities of making art and trying to sell that art, approaches to marketing our work without needing to be a part of the hustle bro culture. And eventually, we do get around to the notion that really piqued my interest when I first met Dave online and invited him onto the podcast, which was committing to one project, and one project only, for a set period of time, in order to be able to focus, and the realities of what that actually looks like. It's a rare conversation without mention of kiln gods or reclaim, but enlightening to see the crossover of similarities when it comes to making a living from the things you make in whatever medium that might be. And we'll get right into all of that right after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield collection of functional ceramic art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. This episode is also sponsored by the Archie Bray Clay business, home of Bray Patch, a ceramic patching material that is best used for filling cracks and bonding breaks. Bray Patch can be applied to either green or bisqueware and fired up to cone 10. It fires paper white, but can be tinted using your chosen clay body and be covered by opaque glaze or slip. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Now, on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the show where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, seasoned entrepreneur of 14 years, Rebecca Ikis Kara. So I have it on record. Say your name out loud for me so I don't mess it up.
Okay, it's Dave Conrey.
Perfect. A friend of mine introduced me recently and messed up my last name, and I was like, Andrew. Like, what? It's been like years.
Yeah, how do you say your last name?
Ikis Kara.
Okay.
I also now get, because our ceramics business is Kara Terra, which is our last name, I get a lot of people calling me Kara, like Kara, like as a first name. I'm like, nope, that's not it.
Right. Right. People make assumptions. People used to call me, because I'd sign all my artwork Conrey. They would just call me Conrey.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm Vincent, but it's Conrey, right? Like Vincent Van Gogh signs Vincent. I like it. No, that's not how. But it's fine. It was like whatever. No.
It's kind of a great test of, did you actually read what I put out there? Did you actually, pay attention to anything? Because you didn't. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I feel like we've accidentally done a cold open, because this is great. This is a great discussion.
Yeah. I love cold opens. I live by those for sure. Those are the best.
Right? I feel the need to be like live on Saturday night. Oh, man. Well, before I go farther down the rabbit hole, Dave, how would you introduce yourself? I'm like, wait, am I going to make it a cold open now? Where do I start?
Where do we go with it? So, by the way, I'm Dave. I'm Dave Conrey. I'm an artist and graphic designer by trade, and I have been doing my own thing now for just over 10 years. I got unceremoniously laid off, pink slip, permission slip to go do my own thing, because my company that I was working for I was a senior art director for a publishing company, and they sold off our entire division to another company that was too far away, and they weren't going to take everybody with it, except for the talent, right? Which is the editors and the salespeople, really. The funny thing was, is that same exact year, I'd actually written myself a blog post called, how did they title it? It was, I Am Unemployable. Because I had a feeling at that moment, is like, this was going to be the year that I was going to bolt. I was going to jump. I was going to go do my own thing. And that was in like February of 2013. And by the end of the year, I was thinking, I'll do my jump 2013. Well, by May 20th of 2013, they sat me down and said, hey, yeah, we're going to be letting you go. Or we're going to be, giving you like, here's your severance, here's your this, all that. It was a weird day, because everybody else was like really sullen and just like, oh, this is the worst thing ever, right? And I'm just like quietly smiling, because I was like, not only do I get to do what I want, but they just gave me a fat check. They sponsored my venture, right? I'm like, nice. So I started doing that years ago, and it was just, at that point, it was just me. I had a podcast as well called The Fresh Rag Show. My website was Fresh Rag. It was all about paper arts, because that was kind of what I was into. And it kind of ebbed and it kind of mutated and became more of a business marketing around the creative arts kind of thing. And then over time, I've just kind of balanced this aspect of making art, right? And then, sharing my thoughts on all this stuff, right? And so going back and forth on that, and sometimes I would lean one direction more or the other. And in, I'd say September 2022, I really leaned in hard to what is now called The Hungry. It's my email newsletter that's based around the idea of creative business, information we need to know, news, commentary from myself, or thoughts and, about like what direction things are going, insights to like help other people navigate this stuff, because I know that creative people, they tend to like, you hear the word creative business and they're like,
marketing,
right?
sales.
Yeah, right. Sales, right. It's like, no, don't make me do that. Yeah. So I kind of lean into that, try to make it, a little bit more accessible to people so they get more acquainted, they get more familiar with it without feeling like overwhelmed by all the hustle bros telling you all this stuff. So I endure the hustle bros and then filter it through the artist filter, right? And to share it with you.
Don't wake up at 5 a.m.
No, I don't wake up at 5. I don't do cold plunges. I don't do liver-based diets or whatever. I don't do any of that stuff. No, I'm not running 100-mile, every single day like some of those guys. No, that's not me. I just, get up late, take my kid to school, drink my coffee, and then I start working. That's it. That's my method.
I love that. Well, and this is exactly how we connected. And I'm about to mention a social media platform, and I don't want people to think that because we connected on Threads, they now have to run over and start doing a new platform. That is not what this conversation is about, guys. So everybody take a deep breath. But it was an interesting, I'm kind of chatting with a completely different group of people over there than I do in other places. And we really connected. I don't remember exactly what the topic was. I've got a feeling it was email newsletters, but you said something and the algorithm fed it to me around owning your audience or email newsletters or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
And then we were off to the races.
Yeah, I think it was something like that, if I remember, because there was some stuff that hit pretty hard early on, and it was around the idea of like owned audiences versus rented audiences, and why I think newsletters are really the best test of a of a business model, because you really find out quickly whether your people want to hear from you or not, stuff like that.
And I'm gonna resist my urge to go down that we will go down that rabbit hole, I am sure. But I'm giggling to myself because what I didn't know was that your background was in graphic design. And that's actually, we were in like parallel universes, because I came out of undergrad with graphic design thinking it was the employable art in about 2009, 2010, when no one was hiring. And then at that same time, you were leaving that industry because no one was hiring, and more so, and downsizing. And it's just really fascinating to me. I don't actually have a question in here. It's just an interesting, I wonder if that graphic design background and how kind of pragmatic that field often is why both of us don't think of marketing as this bad word in the arts, right? Because we're often a part of it.
I would definitely agree with that, right? I came up through a couple of different boutique design studios, and my internship was with a guy named Tony Colombini, who's a local designer out here. And he was just really good about, number one, he taught me, he gave me the best advice about, why typography is the most important aspect of graphic design. At least that's my opinion, right? So I got good education there. But number two, that he was just like, he was a solopreneur himself, right? Like a single person design studio. And so he had to hustle for jobs. And so just watching him, and we'd talk about marketing, talk about stuff like that. It was like much different back then. I mean, that was 1998, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 99 maybe. So yeah, the landscape was way different back then. And then I worked for a different studio, a little bit bigger studio. And over time, I became the marketing director / senior designer or whatever. And yeah, I just got basically just thrown into the fire like that. And it worked really well for a while until, the economy, I think it was 9/11. Well, 9/11 was a big issue and was no business. So so everybody got laid off. And again, so I'm prone to getting pink slips in the design industry for sure. And then I got a job as a senior art director, as an art director for the publishing company, and working with salespeople, publishers who are very business oriented, money oriented, things like that. So, the exposure to all of that was good because it definitely gave me a framework, but it also, I was able to really take that information that they're sharing, these people who are not creative and not they don't really have, not to say they're not creative, but they're less artistic in nature. Like it's not what they're driven by. That's not what their purpose is. But take the information that they're taking and then just kind of, again, pushing it through a filter of what works for us as individuals, what works for us as these people that are just trying to do our thing in our studios and make good work, but also, get it out, shared and shown to the world.
I think that's such an important filter to kind of double down on for a second here in conversation, is because what I see happening for a lot of artists is when you Google for this information, the recommendations and the suggestions are not necessarily built on the reality of being a solo maker, right? Is there a benefit to having an Instagram, a YouTube, a Threads? I don't know if people are worried about Facebook anymore, and an email newsletter and a blog, and are there benefits to all those platforms? Yes. Can you as a solo maker reasonably sustain content for that many platforms and actually make your work and sleep a decent amount and be a good partner or a human or a friend? Probably not. So we have to be realistic with our capacity and be strategic rather with what's going to actually work for you, your medium, what you enjoy doing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, balance is definitely tough, especially because, and I'm sure there's plenty of creative people that feel this, I'm not the organization guy. I'm just not. I have a certain level of organization. I will say that the magazine production job or art direction job was good for this because at least managing the files, managing the content, right? Like structuring all that in a way that's, because that is it's a feast or famine situation there always, right? Because it's you're either not doing anything for 2 weeks or just just banging pages out for 2 weeks straight, trying to get it out to the press on time. And if you're not managing your life around that, you're going to screw it up. And so many of my fellow art directors there were just like terrible at it. And they were always late to the press. And they were always like, they would noodle on images for hours rather than just like, look, man, it's a car magazine. Can we just get it out? I want the pictures to be pretty too, but come on, right? So I have a certain amount of organizational skill around that. But in my daily life, it's like there are certain things I know that need to get done. I need to get up early enough so I can take the kid to school. I need to come back and do a reasonable amount of work so that I can get my newsletter out on time or a blog post or whatever it is. So I know these things, but like I'm not the guy that's sitting in the Notion app or ClickUp or one of these other apps, managing my projects and like, oh, like make sure do this on that and do this. Like, I put my stuff into a notebook with check boxes, right? Because I'm like, even if I have it on my phone, my to-do list on my phone, it's not as effective for me. Like I need to have written it down somewhere to at least have it in the back of the mind. Like, oh, you've got this list of things you need to go check on, Dave. And so that's it. So I'm not the most organized guy. So if I'm having to manage that aspect of my, like, be respectful to myself in that respect, for all that, and then say, okay, now I have to be on this platform and that platform and do this and do that. It's like, I got to pick my battles. I really do. It was for a long time. I do YouTube videos, but it's been a little bit because I've kind of leaned in hard. I told myself earlier, the last part of 2023 that I was going to lean hard into the newsletter and the writing. So I kind of pulled back on some of the videos that I was doing. And then it was just basically, it was the newsletter, it was Instagram, right? And then Threads came and blew up for us, for some of us, right? It just kind of became like a whirlwind thing. And because obviously newsletter writing is writing and Threads is pretty much writing. And so it was like, it just kind of gelled, right? It just gelled and felt good. And so, yeah. So right now it's like it's the newsletter is my main function. Then I'm on Threads, and then I'll touch in on Instagram because obviously I have a lot of visually creative friends that I want to support. So that's pretty much it. Other than that, it's like if I get to something else, cool. But if I don't, that's okay.
And I think what you just said without exactly saying it that somebody might miss is the reason you're doing something like Threads is because of the newsletter. You're not expecting either of these platforms to produce a certain amount of ROI. I mean, for lack of a better...
no, I know what you mean.
I'm trying to think of a metaphor. Like, I think a lot of people think very literally about these platforms in terms of like when Reels had monetization or, you can get paid on YouTube faster than Instagram, whatever. And for me, it's like, that's just a bonus. Whereas these are the top of my funnel. And what I'm actually trying to get people to is the email newsletter or the course or the community or whatever. But, this is just like where everybody's hanging out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the low hanging fruit, right? Yeah. I want to be helpful. I want to get up there and I want to share. I want people to recognize me as a resource for things. Even if it's just me, saying random missives about whatever, music or tacos. I don't know. Doesn't matter, right? I'll say something. I just do it just to be, there's a sense of solidarity and commiseration with the things that we operate on. Like, and I come correct and true with whatever I'm saying. Like, I don't try to perpetrate like, hey, I'm this fantastic artist and designer. I struggle just like anybody else with the things that we deal with on a regular basis. But I'm very much into the idea that you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get back to work when even in your darkest moments, right? So I share the dark moments because I want that solidarity. I want that commiseration. But then I also want them to look at me as like, hey, if he's good about, falling on his face and then getting back up and just getting right back to work, then I could probably do that too. At least that's the hope, right? So that's the low hanging fruit. Some sort of relationship built there, hopefully pulling people down into the newsletter, right? And then through the newsletter, like, I'm offering a course coming soon. You can get into that later if you want, but it's like, I've got this course. Maybe I'll drive them into that course, or maybe they'll trickle down into that course, right? And then, I don't know. It's just, I feel like all these things are necessary, but the important part is to focus on that goal. Like, what do I really want them to achieve? And not that I want to look at every single person as a dollar sign, right? That's not really it. It's just that I'm in this, I'm giving away all this stuff and I'm in it for, I'm trying to make a living too, right? Just like you are with whatever you're doing, whoever you're making, whatever stuff you're putting out in the world. So I'm trying to do that too. But at the same time, I recognize that sometimes we're just here to hang out and talk and BS and, have a good time and then maybe do some business later. I don't know. That was kind of weird roundabout conversation, but
I think for me, that perspective is less about, because I think as soon as our relationships go to purely transactional, that's where things break down, right? So if we're only thinking of follower count or engagement or whatever on a transaction level, we got to talk about some psychosis or something. But I wanted to bring that up more about us as creators, our mental relationship to these platforms.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I'm thinking about the effort that I'm putting into something like Instagram, and I'm only looking at what am I getting out of Instagram for it, I'm going to get really annoyed and depressed about it really quickly. And then we see this repeating conversation happen on every social media platform of like, the glory days are gone. It used to be better. You can't grow now. You can't. We are all the victims of these platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I keep in mind, I'm just going to use this thing as a tool. There's a company that exists that has provided me a way to connect with other humans, and I'm going to use it for what it is in order to, build the life that I want to have and connect with awesome people.
Yeah.
That's it. And if I approach it from there, then it's kind of like, okay, I don't care what Reels incentive they're running or what bonuses I'm just going to keep on keeping on,
Yeah. Are you familiar with Marquez Brownlee?
I don't think so.
Okay. So he's kind of he's a really popular YouTuber. He does tech reviews and stuff like that. And he posted up something the other day and I thought was really vulnerable moment for him because, I think we have these expectations of these superstars, quote unquote superstars in whatever area they're in. And he got out there and he was basically saying, like, he was on Threads and he was saying, I sometimes don't know what I'm supposed to be posting here because it's like, am I trying to just do like, I've got this big channel over here, several, I've actually got a couple and a big podcast too. If I've got these things over here that I'm trying to promote, am I talking just about that stuff so that people go over there to do that thing? And I'm extrapolating and paraphrasing what he's saying, but because Threads doesn't allow for this many characters, right? But, or do I just do me, right? And I think, and he came to the conclusion that it's almost stressful to the point where he won't post because he's not sure if it's the right thing to post, which is like, oh man, especially on Threads, because I feel like that is just like, if there's ever a place, in my opinion, to just be able to just, word vomit whatever thought you want to put out there, then that's the place, right? But he was questioning that. And I thought it was like really, like, it was interesting to see it from a person who's been at this game for a really long time and really popular. And then he's just like, I'm just going to post whatever I want. And I think that that's a really good plan because number one, it releases the stress of having to do it. But it also shows, like if you're willing to do that, then it's going to show a humanity to you. That's a side that most people don't get to see. They always see this kind of like soft-spoken, but casual, but buttoned up guy who talks about these tech things. And it's like, he's a very serious guy because he's got a multi-million-dollar business. Having him show that vulnerability was really nice. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting model that I think a lot of us could follow. It's like, let's just be okay with just being okay, right?
I think that's also something to be said for doing it's this tricky balance with anything, with being self-employed and maybe with life and personal improvement or something. There's this balance between pushing ourselves to do something that's a little uncomfortable. Like I don't believe you have to post your face on social media to succeed, however you're defining that. But if that's something, pushing yourself to do something a little uncomfortable and yet also sticking within a certain realm of comfort so that you're not trying to create something that's not normal for you. In the sense that, like, in terms of, I'm stumbling around because I'm trying to avoid the word authentic because it's,
right. Yeah.
At this point, it's just so overused. But to go back to that vulnerability piece of the guy that you're talking about, it's also the recognition that, you can be very successful. You can be very knowledgeable at a lot of things, for like him running a multi-million-dollar business. And yet something new will still come across your plate for all of us to assume the person we perceive as successful knows all the things, everything. right? Because I think that this is a little bit of what's happening online is like you have one person who teaches one subject or has a perception of a certain amount of success on a platform. And therefore it's like, oh, I'm going to ask them what they do for this and for all of these things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they know that universally, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, right? Everybody's trying to figure it out. You're not missing anything. We're all working on figuring it out. And some of us have figured out certain aspects really well, and we're working on other ones.
Yeah. Well, and I think about, I don't remember who said it, but it's like the problems don't go away when you get more successful. In fact, if anything, they get greater. They scale at the rate that you're scaling your whatever it is you're doing. So if you've got a multi-million-dollar business, then you've got multi-million-dollar problems, right? And so, it really does lend perspective, but it's also you have grown to a certain degree to be immune to certain things. Also, you've built up the armor as you're going through that. And so they may be really big problems. And if Marquez told us what his biggest issue was, it might feel like somebody just dropped a tank on us. But he's figured out a way, and he's got staff to help him in figuring out. And it might still be heavy for him, but he's obviously figured out ways to be better about that stuff. So it's all relative, I think. But it just goes to show that we are all human beings. We're all going through this the same, right? To some degree. Some just happen to have a little bit more, a little bit more money lining the pockets right now. But, I think
who
that
started sooner, and I don't know that his success doesn't mean anybody who wants to go after that couldn't now. It's just he started years ago. He's 10 years from now, someone who starts might be where he is.
Yeah. And I think that, as far as comfort step, you mentioned this step, stepping into uncomfortable things. It's like, I've always had this, I say this to my son all the time. Like whenever you want to grow, you don't have to take these huge leaps to get into new things, right? It's always like your comfort circle is really just only as big as what the next step you're willing to take. So if you take one small step outside of your comfort circle, it doesn't mean that the circle moves with you, right? It's not like this, like, oh, this is the diameter of my comfort circle, and it just moves as I move. It gets bigger every time. So let's say fearful of putting your face up on camera. Well, the first time you do it, it's going to feel like scary as hell. You've done it, and you're like, it didn't kill me, so I could do it again. And you do it again, and then soon you're like, putting yourself on camera is not an issue at all. And your comfort circle has gotten larger from that exercise. We do have to test ourselves, even if it's as simple as using new tools in the work that you're doing, or using new materials, trying a new strategy. This stuff is scary, right? And we always want to make what we want to make. But, sometimes we just have to kind of step into something new, fall on our face a little bit, get back up, try it again, find out it may not be the right thing for us, but now we've built up this immunity to that, right? It's like it didn't hurt as bad as I thought it was going to hurt. So now I can maybe go over this direction with a little bit less fear, a little bit less anxiety.
I liken it to building up a muscle, right? Like the first time, and maybe it's just because it's the beginning of the year, I'm inundated with ads around physical health. So maybe that's why that metaphor is at the top of my head. But, I remember back when I first started my business, and the idea of a bad review was enough to give me a panic attack, right? Like it was enough to say yes to whatever somebody wanted because, oh my God, I couldn't possibly have a bad review. That was going to be the end of the world. Until you realize like saying yes to anything anybody wants is actually going to be terrible. That's not going to sustain you. You can't keep up with that. And I'm still a recovering people pleaser. So there's new things that send me into a state of panic because I'm doing new things, right? There's when Francesco and I first started selling our ceramics, because that was a new thing for me to sell, we didn't quite have our terms figured out. We didn't know what we were going to do about requests for refunds or returns. And until we got those clear, any message alert I got, like when we were selling on Etsy, any just notification. I hadn't even read the message yet, but I saw the alert and I was like, oh my God, right? Because I didn't have that clarity yet. But then as we kept going, we got clear, we got experience, we realized what's sustainable, what's not. And now I haven't had an Etsy-induced panic attack in a while, right? Because it's like I had to build up that muscle. I had to build up that kind of like a thick skin is an idiom I think of a lot in terms of, as you said, it doesn't kill you. You figure it out and then you get clearer at your communication and then it's less scary. But there's really I think what a lot of people want to do is skip past that point. Mm-hmm. They want to go from 0 to I have it all figured out and everything's going to be okay. And there isn't a shortcut between those things.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, and I think the other side of that is that if they can't see how to do that, they won't do it, right? If they can't figure out how to traverse that chasm or whatever in an instant, they won't do it. They just push back and it's like, oh, it's too much. It's too much work, right? Yeah, I see that a lot too. And I'm guilty of it as well. I've done that too in the past, and thankfully built up, my own immunity towards falling on my face and trying new things and I kind of liked it. I kind of didn't. So I don't know if it's going to be my main thing. So I won't do it again, but I'm going to go try this other thing. Why not? Let's go see what, if I can walk on, leather shoes on an ice pond. Why not? Let's do that. Let's see if we can get across this. Right. The more you do, the more often you put yourself in uncomfortable scenarios, the more likely you're going to want to do that because you built up the immunity.
I just remembered what the original thing you said online was that started all of these conversations.
Okay.
So I'm going to just right turn on everything we're talking. And I'm not going to create a pretty segue.
I'm along for the ride. Let's go.
You had talked about I forget exactly how you phrased it, but it was the notion of doing one project at a time. You were kind of setting aside other things, other responsibilities. And I'm going to let you explain whatever it was because I feel like you had a really good title to it that was more succinct.
Well, and I steal this from one of those hustle bros, really, but they call it a season of no. And it basically is I am trying to, my personal objective was to build and grow the newsletter, The Hungry. But it was I'm doing video, I'm doing social media, and then I'm trying to do this thing over here. I'm trying to make my own art, trying to do this and trying to do that. And it was you can't do it all. You can't, the old adage of the wolf who chases 2 rabbits catches none, right? And so I just said, I'm just going to take a season, a period of time where I'm just going to do this thing. Everything else kind of gets put on the back burner. And am I perfect execution on that? No, of course not. I'm still going to be on Instagram a little too long. I'm still, going to want to dabble and do this other thing. But at least in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've spent enough time dabbling. It's time to get back to, the center where I'm focused at and going this direction. And I think it's really, as a creative, it's really difficult. It's not easy because we are so easily pulled to our impulses, our inspiration, our intuition on what it is we want to make. It's really difficult. And I get that, but that is also the reason why I need to do it. Because if I don't do it, I'll never get anything done. So I have to force myself into it. And I know a lot of people would just cringe at the idea of that, but it's just something I thought was necessary. And, I'm still kind of in there and I'm almost feeling a little bit I'm trying to be in there, but I really, at the beginning of the year, I really kind of screwed up my plan a little bit in good ways, but I'm launching a course at the end of the month. And you got a podcast that I'm doing with another friend starting, at this point, it's already been a couple of months, And so, all of this is date back to before this episode went live. But all of these things that I'm doing, and I keep thinking to myself in the back of my head, I need to get back to the center again. I know it's happening, but I've already committed to, I need to finish this project. I need to finish that project, and then I'll bring it back to center. As soon as I do that, then it's all in again. This is one of those things, right? Everybody's going to work how they want to work. But if you're not focusing your attention at certain times on the thing that you really want to do, what's the end result that you really want to make? If you're not focusing on that, what you're saying, if you can sit there and say to yourself, does what I'm doing right now help me get me to that goal? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't be doing it, right?
You had no idea that this is what the topic I've been sitting on for the past few weeks. I didn't share that with you, but the way we kickstarted the year inside of our community was me explaining how I set the goals that I set in terms of annual goals, because it's the beginning of the year, so that was naturally on everybody's mind, but also then how to actually get them done. Because as humans, we all need to just admit, from January 1st to December 31st, it does not stay the same. Like, best of intentions and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking about, what I was sharing was the idea of setting a 5-year vision, so you know where you want to go long term, and breaking that down into 1 year, and breaking that 1 year down into quarters, that then you're taking these 3-month chunks or even 1-month chunks to focus on. And the way that that connects in my brain with what you just said is the idea that, like, the 1-month project I just chose to work on for, the start of 2024 is actually connected to the 5-year vision, right? So, like, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing, as opposed to getting distracted by the subject we were on before in terms of a new social media platform or whatever, and only doing it because you feel like you should or you have to because the rest of the internet is telling you that. Whereas it's more like, no, I'm intentionally choosing to do this thing because it informs where I ultimately want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of through line.
Yeah.
But pragmatically speaking, if this idea of a season of no is of interest, where I have struggled the most is, how do you make that work as a full-time maker, right? If you are needing to sustain yourself and bring in the thing that pays the bills, there's, I think, an underlying fear there of turning away things that can pragmatically just, cover the mortgage, if you will.
Right. Okay. So my situation is definitely unique in this respect. I have a little bit of privilege here. I don't want to get into the financial details, but I have a little bit of privilege here. It's not a lot, but I have a little bit of privilege, and it keeps me sustained. But if I didn't have that, then yeah, of course, you have to put money in the bank. You have to put the food on the table, all those idioms. However, it's like when you have the free time, and I know you're tired, and I know you're, like you've got too many things on your plate. You just got home from your day job. You're just doing your day job work, whatever that might be. It's not the thing that you want to focus on. I get that you have to do it. But at a certain point, if you want this other thing, you must focus on it. Like when you have those free times, even if that free time is only like an hour or two every single day, your energy is spent on that, not all these other projects that you have going on. If I were building a newsletter and I still wanted to make art, like, okay, well, I need to put up most of my energy, 99.9% of my energy into the newsletter right now. And if I have some free time sitting on the sofa with my wife and my kid, watching a movie, I can pick up my iPad and I can doodle and procreate. But if I'm here in the studio trying to make art for 3 hours, that's not enough. Right now, it's not an efficient use of my time. Like, I want to make art, but it's not where I'm headed. I was selling my art more frequently before, but I just kind of like, once I started to get back into the newsletter and all that, I kind of like my impetus for making the newsletter was far more important than making the art. Like, I just didn't get as much joy out of, like, I love making it, but I don't get as much joy out of selling it. The process after that, like, that didn't bring me joy. The process of making was great. I love that, still love it. But where I found my joy was in the sharing of the information that I knew. Whatever I'm pulling from the internet, what, personal information that I have, sharing that. So if I want to lean into that joy and be good with it and share and help other people grow, then that's where I need to put my energy. And I can't sacrifice that. I can't sacrifice the energy that needs to go into that to grow it so that it can replace my other income. Yes, I'm going to be exhausted. Yes, I'm probably not going to get as much sleep as I probably should. Again, not trying to be totally hustle broed out. Like, I don't like that. I don't like that energy at all. I hate that energy. But if I want a thing, I need to make sure that I'm putting the energy into that thing. If I'm not going to put the energy into it, then why am I doing it?
I guess it goes back to the notion that I was saying of, like, it's important to put yourself a little bit into discomfort while at the same time being true to yourself. We're also saying there are seasons in which we do have to push and hustle. At the same time, we're not saying bro grind hustle culture 5 a.m. cold plunges is a different level.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. But, it's not everybody's going to do it. Mm-hmm. Not everybody's going to, they're going to get to that again. They're going to get to that level of comfort that it's good for them. And they're going to push back away from that because it's not. And I don't mean to be harsh on that, but I just recognize that there's only a certain percentage of people that will actually make that effort, right? Because they want to lean into what's comfortable. They want to sit on the couch and casually make their art with their family or whatever. You know, they want to do that. I do too. But sometimes it's like, I can't, right? I should qualify that because I put a lot of value into spending that time with my family, right? Especially with my kid. I get very little time to just kind of hang out with him because he's a total jock. My kid's a total jock, right? I wasn't a jock growing up. I played sports, but he's like a total jock.
Light despair. You're like, I'm an artist. My child is a jock.
Yeah, he's a total. And I love that for him. I do, because I think it's going to be his path to greatness. But, he's a good student. He's a jock. He's got, a lot of friends. And so he's, he plays video games. So I don't have a ton of time with him. So I appreciate that time when I can spend it. In fact, I do dedicate a little bit of time for that pretty regular basis because I want I want to be there for him or with him. But that said, like, as soon as he's off to bed, I'm back at work. 100% all the time because I've got stuff to do, so, and I've got a vision, I've got a goal, and I ain't going to do it by continuing to sit on that couch and doodle on Procreate, right? So,
and I think the example of sitting on the couch with loved ones watching TV isn't so much about, we're not talking about avoiding quality time with the people we love in order to sustain a project. We're talking about kind of the mindless routine of you go to work, you come home, you turn on the television, you sit there, and then it's kind of like, why can't I move forward on these things? You could put it similarly into a analysis paralysis metaphor, right? Where you get an idea, you want to figure it out so that you don't make a mistake, so you avoid failure. So you spend so much time researching and analyzing and checking things out that you don't get off the analysis couch and just go do the damn thing. And guess what? You'll figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that goes right back to like that idea of the comfort circle thing. People they want to cross the chasm in one leap, right? As opposed to, shimmying across the rope, right? They want to go and watch 8 hours of YouTube videos and then figure it out, or get the impulse completely pushed out of them because it all seems too difficult and unreal. And next thing you're watching people do cat videos and lawn care on YouTube. You've completely forgotten what you were doing when you started. Yeah.
Yes, but God, that dog is hilarious.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, to give everybody a little bit of context of, where we're coming at from these conversations, because I also think it's important to address, like, we're having this analysis, both of us, ironically, 10 plus years of self-employment ahead of time, right? We came at it in uniquely similar ways. Uniquely similar? Is that like jumbo shrimp and oxymoron?
Yeah. Maybe.
I jumped straight to the big stuff before actually setting the primer, I suppose, for everybody in terms of like, in this shift for yourself, what were you making beforehand? What did life look like with that self-employment as an artist that has kind of led you to here with the Hungry?
Wow. Okay. So
Small question.
Yeah. So big answer. So if we go back to like when I started, before even, was full time on my own, I was trying to figure out what stage I was at that point. Oh, so like I said, I had a website called Fresh Rag, and it was all about featuring artists, including myself, that did work on paper or used paper as their medium, whether it was like watercolorists or people that did like, greeting cards and stuff like that. So things like that, right? Magazines, zines, stuff like that. So at the time, I was doing a lot of digital collage prints that were just like, I'm Californian and I live by the beach, very beach culture oriented stuff. And so I was making these prints and I would go and I would sell them at local shows or whatever, local events. And that's kind of like where I was at, because it was just enough. Like, I had art supplies and I had canvases in the garage at the time, but it was just because of the work and because of, being like, at that point, my kid was like a toddler at that point. So, and my wife, a very busy corporate sales executive for, a large hospitality brand. So she's super busy. And I was kind of like, my schedule at the job was really loose. As long as stuff got out the door on time, then they didn't really care too much about exactly how much time I spent in the chair. I was basically primary parent for a good portion of that. And so I didn't have a ton of time to be in the studio and paint, but it was super easy for me to, at that point, just do all my work on my laptop, because I could put on Blue's Clues, have him sit in the, in his little chair or whatever, eat his little snack, and I could sit there and work while we're doing it, right? That's where I was at the time. And then once the layoff hit, I was also talking, again, at that point, I'd started talking a lot more about, sharing what my thoughts were on marketing, promotion, and what I did know about sales. And I think at that time, I didn't even have my own shop. I still was working on Etsy myself. And so I would like share as much of that. And then I started a podcast and I started interviewing people myself as well. And, it just kind of like steamrolled into this new thing. And then again, at that time, I was still doing a little bit of digital work, but I was leaning more into the content creation. But then at a certain point, I was talking about this stuff and I thought, you know what? If I'm going to be talking about selling art, quote unquote, selling art, then I should probably really double down on that, right? Get back to doing more art so that I have this, I can do the play by play, right? I can say, like, I'm starting to build this thing back up. This is what I'm going to do. Well, funny thing happened on the way to the forum, right? I started really loving the art and not so much loving what I was sharing as far as content. Not that I didn't like it, but going back to the word authentic, like it almost felt inauthentic because I wasn't sharing my personal experiences and I felt like I kind of put myself into a box about what I was supposed to be sharing on there. And it just didn't feel as good, but the art felt great, right? So yeah, so I just kind of did that. Of course, I was, I'm always sharing ideas and thoughts and content, even no matter where I showed up, whether it was on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or wherever. It's like, it was always a mix of like me doing a little bit of creative work and then me sharing my thoughts on the industry, my thoughts on the process, my thoughts on, how to grow. And then I really leaned in hard to the art I guess it was pandemic, really. I think it really was. I'd been doing it, but obviously we were all locked down. So I got up on TikTok and I started doing a bunch of videos and, live videos and doing my stuff. And that really kind of like, because the account grew really a lot at that point, I was like, oh, this feels good. Attention feels great. I love all this attention. Please buy my stuff. Right. And so it was doing its thing for a while. But then at a certain point, I was like, I felt like I was having to make, because that's what I told. Again, I was making this stuff, all the art, because it's what everybody expected of me at that point. So it's like almost the opposite of what I did when I first started my blog and podcast and all that other stuff. It's like the same idea, different subject matter. Around the same time, I started writing a blog and a newsletter. Well, I guess that really started about 2022 when it really kind of started. Like I found Substack and then I was like, oh, this feels really good. This feels good, easy, fun to do. I'm going to do this. And it would just like be these super simple, less than 500 word posts about whatever it was, what I was into. And then at some point, again, the thing switched, right? It's just like, this feels comfortable because not only am I really into what I'm talking about, goes right back to my history of doing it, but I'm 10 years more knowledgeable. I'm 10 years more experienced. So the idea of what I originally thought, I'm going to go dabble in art just so I know what I'm talking about, really became true. It just took me a lot longer to get there than what I expected, right? Or a lot longer for me to recognize that I'd gotten the wisdom or information, the knowledge that I needed to go back to what was originally the plan all along. And that kind of like, that's what started, the Hungry. Originally the name, by the way, was The Hungry Artist. But I noticed that like artist was a very exclusive term to a lot of, and like a lot of the people that listen to what I do and share what or like pay attention are not just artists, not fine artists, not visual artists. They're designers, they're illustrators, they're photographers, they're musicians. They're people that do, like print on demand for Redbubble and whatever, so it's like, it's all over the place as far as creatives go. So I changed it to The Hungry because it just was more concise and less exclusionary, I guess, so.
Oh, I love the name because I also feel like it, number one, without having artist at the end, it makes it, you're removing away, I think you and I both agree the moniker of starving artist is really annoying, and it just like continues to drive the stereotype of like, well, if you love what you do, it's okay if you don't get paid. I'm like, no, I need to buy groceries. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm not making anything good if I have a headache because I haven't eaten. Like that's how that works. At the same time, for me, at least, the name, not knowing that it used to have artist at the end, also kind of taps into this sense of desire or drive, whatever the right word is, of like we crave this thing. We want to pursue this so much. It is like a hunger, right? Like that we must go after in a certain way. I was thinking about this the other day, that some of what we are doing is also kind of processing this experience publicly, right? Like, it's some of the content putting out there, like there's a different part of it because there's a knowledge base underneath and a ability to kind of hopefully help educate or inspire. But also there's still the stuff that we're figuring out and going back and forth, and, you know, kind of connects to the YouTuber that you mentioned, in terms of like, there's certain things we know and we know work and we can help with, and there's other things we're still figuring out. So it all sort of connects. I really respect, though, that you took the time to actually put yourself in the ring, because I think this is something that is kind of a chip on my shoulder when I see so much online education, is that for me, but my bias is there's a huge value difference between the people who are still in the ring trying to do the thing, to kind of adjust a quote from Brene Brown of like, it's one thing to teach somebody how to sell something when your business model is selling teaching. It's another thing to teach someone how to sell their art because you also spent 10 years working on selling your art, right? It's just different.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, like I see it all the time on Instagram. You see that, hey, I'll show you how to, I did this. I had one success, and I'll tell you exactly how I did it. Although I haven't been able to repeat it since, I'm going to tell you about this one circumstance.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you a course on it.
Talking about.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is that I'm always, again, I try to be as real as possible with where I'm coming from. I will never say that, like, how to sell $1 billion in paintings or anything like that, because obviously, even all I can tell you is like, these are all the mistakes that I've made that kept me from making money. This is what I did that didn't help me. I can speak from that perspective, like, you know, that like maybe I didn't sell tons and tons of art, but I definitely know through the experience that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. But I know that, you know, like through other things I've done that have worked, maybe not necessarily in art, but like how to grow a newsletter, through engagement, through connection, through, you know, being consistent, through focusing your attention. If that works there, then at least a certain aspect of that should work over here to this thing. And if I can do this here, I can do it over there. And I should expect a reasonable, similar result. Reasonable. Yeah.
Well, and how much do any of us know? That's a whole nother subject to dive down. That's for round 2 of conversation, because I'm like, do you need 20 million followers? I don't. I just want an amazing, my absolute max for our community in my brain would be 200, absolute max. And to any internet company, that's like not viable. And I'm like, what do you mean? That's 200 humans? That would be incredible.
Yeah, if you were standing in a room of 200 people telling your stuff that paid to listen to you talk, that'd be great.
They'd be overwhelming. What would you like? I want to change all the social media platforms to like not say followers, but say humans. I wonder what it would do for our brains.
Yeah, but that's an interesting perspective. I like that. I like that a lot.
But before we run out of time, there's a million more things we could have talked about. But is there something in particular that, you know, either you wish more people heard or just want to just make sure is out into the world?
The only thing I feel like, you know, a lot of people sell themselves short, right? They sell their abilities, they sell their tenacity short. Well, I relate a lot of things back to parenting, because I'll tell you what, if there's ever been lessons learned, it's through that. But one of the things that I've been sharing with my son a lot is the quote from a Muhammad Ali about, I'll show you how great I am. And it's just, you know, Muhammad Ali was a polarizing figure, but he was very he was confident. And whenever he was like talking, he would talk about himself as from a very positive standpoint. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't always believe it, but he knew that if he got up there, at least get himself motivated enough to do what it is that he had to do. Because he basically, you know, even though he was one of the greatest that ever lived in that sport, the idea was that he still had to get into a ring and get punched in the face, right? And none of us are doing that. So if he can get up there and say, I'm going to get in the ring with the baddest mofo ever. Sorry, I don't know if that's too much, right? If I can get up there with the baddest dude on the planet and be okay with it, then you and I have no complaints. We should be able to lean into our own greatness, stop doubting ourselves, stop second guessing ourselves, and stop telling ourselves that, oh, I can't do that. I don't know how to learn the new technology. I don't know how to learn new techniques. I don't know how to learn. I'm terrible at sales and marketing. Like, okay, well, go learn it. Get in the ring. Just like you said, get in the ring. Get punched in the face by life and be okay with it.
And it doesn't hurt as bad as an actual punch to the face. Well, before I let you go, I want to make sure everybody knows where to find what you're doing on the internet. Come connect with you. I'll obviously put links in the show notes, but just tell us the best place.
Okay, so The Hungry is the best place to find me as far as like what I'm doing, what I'm sharing. It's just thehungry.art. You can go find me, find me there. I'm on social media as far as social media goes. I'm Threads and Instagram, both at Dave Conrey. So, and that's primarily it, right? If you want to reach out to me directly, DM me through Instagram. That's the best way to reach me.
Awesome. Dave, thank you so much for your time. I super appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
So, ending on a metaphor of getting punched in the face might have been a bit extreme, but honestly, I bet that's how promoting yourself or marketing your own art might feel sometimes. So, I don't know, maybe it's not actually all that far off. So many of these topics Dave and I discussed are ongoing battles for all of us trying to figure out how to make a living from the things that we make. I don't have a lovely wrapped up ending here because frankly, these are the conversations that always continue. There is no ending per se. There's always something changing, whether it be a new social media app yet again, or whether it be a massive economic shift. And part of our jobs as small business owners, sometimes unfortunately, is to have to sort through those changes. Figuring out if it's actually a really big deal that we need to focus on, like when photography went from film to digital, for example, or in the case of many social media platforms, I might argue, maybe not nearly as urgent of a change as the world makes it seem. I suppose the wrap up on this particular conversation is just a simple, but hard to accept at times, reminder that making a living from the things we make takes time. And the only silver bullet to success, I'm using air quotes here, is to keep showing up and doing the work. Some days that work is the actual creation of your art. And other days, that work is in fact the work of telling the world your art exists. Also known as that word you hate, marketing. And in today's day and age, often marketing is wrapped up in taking photos and videos of our work. So I just actually made a beautiful little segue into something particularly time sensitive for you right now. At the time that I'm airing this episode, the doors to the Maker's Photography Styling System, my seminal course specifically for ceramicists and makers to take better photos faster, even with something as simple as their cell phone, those doors are finally open again. Now, this is the first time we've opened back up the course since 2023, so it is really exciting on my side of the computer here. That being said, the doors close on June 20th, or whenever we hit max capacity, whichever one comes first. So depending on when you're listening, well, you might need to have a little bit of sense of urgency and quickly grab that studio towel, wipe the mud off your hands, and visit makersplaybook.com/MPSS to join while you still can. Of course, if you're driving while listening, please pull over first because that webpage has a lot of information to read, including details on the lifetime access to the course and many, many more frequently asked questions. Like, yes, you can do this with only your cell phone, and no, you do not need to spend a bunch of money on additional props or equipment. So, just put the turn signal on, safely merge out of traffic, and then come visit makersplaybook.com/MPSS. And of course, I'll put the link in the show notes. If you have any questions that I didn't answer on the site, by all means, reach out to me. You can either send an email at hello@makers-playbook.com or a DM on Instagram at the Makers Playbook. Once again, this episode was made possible in part thanks to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield collection of functional ceramic art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great source for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. This episode is also sponsored by the Archie Bray Clay business, home of Bray Patch, a ceramic patching material that is best used for filling cracks and bonding breaks. Bray Patch can be applied to either green or bisqueware and fired up to cone 10. It fires paper white but can be tinted using your chosen clay body and be covered by opaque glaze or slip. Order anytime online at archiebrayclay.com. Audio post-production of this podcast is made possible by help from Christy Kotzfan, with promotional material assistance from Queenie Maliki. The Makers Playbook podcast is recorded on the original homelands of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee people, where the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. Until next time, my friends, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.